My name is Celeste Rivera and I'm 28 years old. Last month I discovered something that shattered everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. The parents who abandoned me when I was 4 years old just sued me for $2.7 million. Money my grandfather left me in his will. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. The lawsuit revealed a family secret so dark, so calculated, that it turned my entire world upside down and exposed the real reason they left me behind all those years ago. Call to action. Before we dive into this wild family revenge drama, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're ready for a story that'll make you question everything about blood loyalty and family karma, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because what happens next will blow your mind. Trust me, this inheritance battle gets messier than you could ever imagine, and the justice served at the end. Chef's kiss. Absolutely perfect. Growing up, I always wondered what I had done wrong. What could a 4-year-old possibly do to make her parents pack up in the middle of the night and disappear forever? That's exactly what happened to me in 1999. One morning I woke up in my little pink bedroom, and by evening I was sitting on my grandfather Roberto's front porch with a hastily packed suitcase and a note that simply read, "We can't do this anymore. Take care of her." My parents, Marcus and Linda Rivera, had vanished like smoke. No phone calls, no birthday cards, no Christmas presents, nothing. For 24 years I lived with the crushing weight of abandonment, always wondering if I wasn't lovable enough, smart enough, or simply enough, period. My grandfather became my everything. My father figure, my mother figure, my protector, and my biggest cheerleader, all rolled into one incredible man. Roberto Rivera was a first-generation immigrant who built a small empire from nothing. He started with a single food truck in downtown Phoenix and slowly expanded into a chain of successful Mexican restaurants across Arizona. But more than his business success, he was the kind of grandfather who showed up to every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. He taught me Spanish, how to make his famous salsa verde, and most importantly, how to stand up for myself in a world that sometimes felt determined to knock me down. Mija, he used to tell me while we worked side by side in his restaurant kitchen. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when life gets hard. Those words became my mantra, especially during the lonely teenage years, when I watched other kids get picked up by both parents while I waited for just one grandfather who somehow managed to be worth 10 of anyone else's family members. Roberto never spoke badly about my parents, but I could see the hurt in his eyes whenever I asked about them. Some people, he'd say, carefully make choices they think are best at the time, even when those choices hurt the people they love most. I spent years trying to decode that cryptic response, never imagining the real truth was far more sinister than anything my innocent mind could have conceived. When I turned 18, I legally changed my last name from Martinez back to Rivera, my grandfather's name. It felt like coming home to myself. I'd spent my entire childhood feeling like an outsider in my own family story, but taking Roberto's name made me feel like I finally belonged somewhere. He cried when I showed him the paperwork, and for the first time in my life, I understood what unconditional love actually felt like. College was tough financially, but Roberto insisted on paying every penny. Education, he'd say, is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you, Mija, not even family. I studied business and marketing, dreaming of one day helping him expand his restaurant empire even further. We had plans, big, beautiful plans about opening locations in California and Texas, about building something that would last for generations. I graduated summa cum laude in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. While other families struggled to stay connected through Zoom calls, Roberto and I grew even closer. We spent lockdown renovating his house, cooking together, and planning for the future. He taught me everything about running the restaurants, from inventory management to staff scheduling to customer relations. "You're my legacy, Celeste," he'd tell me. "Everything I've built, it's all for you." But Roberto wasn't just preparing me to inherit his business. He was preparing me for something much bigger. Something he knew was coming but never fully explained. Looking back now, I realize he was trying to protect me from a truth that would have destroyed my faith in humanity long before I was strong enough to handle it. The last conversation we had about my parents was in March 2023, just 2 months before he passed away. We were sitting on his back porch watching the Arizona sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Out of nowhere he said, "Celeste, I need you to promise me something. When I'm gone and certain people come looking for what's mine, you remember who was here. You remember who stayed. You remember who loved you when you had nothing to offer in return." I laughed it off at the time, thinking he was just being dramatic. "Abuelo, you're not going anywhere. You're too stubborn to die." But he grabbed my hand with surprising strength and looked me directly in the eyes. "Promise me," he repeated. "Some people will try to rewrite history, but you know the truth. You lived it. That promise would become the foundation of everything that happened next." Roberto passed away peacefully in his sleep on May 15, 2023, at the age of 78. The funeral was packed with employees, customers, and community members whose lives he'd touched. I gave the eulogy through tears, talking about a man who chose to be a father when he didn't have to, who built an empire with his bare hands, and who taught me that real family is forged through daily acts of love, not accidents of biology. What I didn't know as I stood at that podium surrounded by hundreds of people who genuinely loved and respected my grandfather was that my biological parents were somewhere in the crowd. They had come back after 24 years of silence, not to mourn the man who raised their abandoned daughter, but to position themselves for the legal battle that was about to turn my life upside down. The reading of the will was scheduled for exactly 1 week after the funeral. I expected it to be a formality. Roberto had always been clear that everything would come to me. But as I sat in that lawyer's office, I had no idea I was about to discover just how much my grandfather had been protecting me from and how far some people will go when money is involved. The law office of Henderson and Associates felt intimidatingly formal, with its dark wood paneling and leather-bound law books. I sat in an oversized chair, still wearing black from the funeral, clutching a tissue box like a lifeline. Mr. Henderson, Roberto's longtime attorney, shuffled through papers with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd delivered countless life-changing news over his 40-year career. "Miss Rivera," he began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, "your grandfather was very specific about his wishes. He updated this will multiple times over the years, with the final revision completed just 6 months before his passing. That detail struck me as odd. Why would he need to update his will so frequently? But I pushed the thought aside, assuming it was just typical elderly paranoia about making sure everything was perfect. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and began reading, "To my beloved granddaughter Celeste Rivera, who has been my greatest joy and my proudest accomplishment, I leave my entire estate. This includes all restaurant properties, residential real estate investment accounts, and personal belongings. The total estimated value as of this writing is approximately $2.7 million. I nearly choked on my coffee. I knew Roberto was comfortable, but I had no idea he'd accumulated that much wealth. The restaurants were successful, sure, but $2.7 million felt like monopoly money to someone who'd been living paycheck to paycheck through college and my early career. However, Mr. Henderson continued, and my stomach dropped at that word. There are some specific provisions and explanations your grandfather wanted you to understand. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Roberto's distinctive handwriting. He asked that you read this privately, but there's also a recorded video message he made specifically for this moment. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a 3-page letter in both English and Spanish, written in the careful script of someone who wanted every word to be crystal clear. My dearest Celeste, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're about to state of Kefil Ander. Learn some truths that I've spent 24 years protecting you from. Your parents didn't abandon you because they couldn't handle being parents. They abandoned you because they found out about this money. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to read that sentence 3 times before it sank in. My parents knew about money. What money? Roberto was just starting to build his restaurant empire when I was 4. How could they have known about wealth that didn't even exist yet? The letter continued. In 1999, I received a substantial inheritance from my own father's estate in Mexico, land that had been in our family for generations, but was sold to developers. The inheritance was $800,000, which in 1999 was enough to change our family's entire future. I told your parents about it because I wanted to share my good fortune, maybe help them buy a house, start a college fund for you. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the letter steady. The video screen in front of me showed Roberto sitting in his home office looking directly into the camera with the serious expression he wore when teaching me important life lessons. What happened next, his recorded voice said, matching the words I was reading, broke my heart in ways I never thought possible. Your parents asked me to put the inheritance in a trust for you. Seemed like a loving, responsible idea. But then they demanded to be named as trustees with full access until you turned 25. The room felt like it was spinning. Everything I thought I knew about my abandonment was crumbling with each sentence. Roberto's voice continued from the recording. When I refused and said the money would go directly to you when you turned 18, they made a demand that showed me who they really were. They wanted half the inheritance, immediately claiming they deserved it for raising you so far. When I said no, they threatened to disappear with you and make sure I never saw you again. I gasped out loud, earning a concerned look from Mr. Henderson. But I couldn't stop reading, couldn't stop watching. This was my origin story, the real reason my life had been torn apart when I was too young to understand. I called their bluff, Roberto's image said sadly. I told them that if money was more important than family, then they weren't the people I thought they were. I said if they walked away, they'd be walking away from everything. Not just the money, but from you, from me, from any future claims to our family. I made it clear that abandonment meant abandonment legally and completely. The letter in my hands was becoming tear-stained, but I pressed on. They left you on my doorstep that very night, Celeste. Not because they couldn't handle being parents, but because they were gambling that I'd change my mind once I saw how their abandonment hurt you. They thought I'd pay them to come back. Instead, I used that inheritance money to build the restaurants, to create something lasting for you. Every dollar was invested in your future, not theirs. The final page contained legal documents I didn't fully understand, but Mr. Henderson explained them clearly. Your grandfather had these papers drawn up in 1999 and updated them every time your parents made any attempt to contact him about money. They've reached out 17 times over the years. always asking about the restaurant's success, never asking about you. 17 times. In 24 years, my parents had contacted my grandfather 17 times about money and 0 times about their daughter. There's more, Mr. Henderson said gently. Your grandfather anticipated that your parents would surface after his death. He's left you not just the inheritance, but a complete legal defense fund and evidence of every time they chose money over family. He called it your armor against greed. I sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what I'd just learned. My parents hadn't abandoned me because I wasn't enough. They'd abandoned me because $800,000 wasn't enough for them. But if Roberto knew they might come back for money, and if he'd been updating his will for years to protect against them, that meant, Mr. Henderson, I said slowly, are they already here? Are my parents already making claims against the estate? His grave expression told me everything I needed to know before he spoke. Miss Rivera, we need to discuss the lawsuit that was filed yesterday. The lawsuit papers felt heavier than they should have, like they were made of lead instead of paper. Marcus and Linda Rivera versus Celeste Rivera and the estate of Roberto Rivera. They were suing for $2.7 million plus interest, claiming wrongful disinheritance and emotional damages from forced estrangement. The legal language was dense and intimidating, but the basic message was crystal clear. My parents wanted everything. They're claiming Mr. Henderson explained that Roberto manipulated them into abandoning you by threatening financial ruin if they didn't comply with his unreasonable demands. They're painting themselves as victims who were forced to make an impossible choice between their daughter and their survival. I laughed, actually laughed, at the audacity. They're saying grandfather forced them to abandon me. They're making themselves the victims in this story. It gets worse, he said grimly. They've hired Patterson Wells and Associates, one of the most aggressive litigation firms in Phoenix. These aren't small-time lawyers looking for a quick settlement. They're going for blood. The next 2 hours were a crash course in estate law, inheritance disputes, and legal strategy. Mr. Henderson explained that even though Roberto's will was ironclad, my parents were attacking it from multiple angles. They claimed undue influence, arguing that Roberto had manipulated a grieving young woman, me, against her own parents. They were alleging elder abuse, suggesting that I had somehow coerced a healthy 7-8-year-old businessman into changing his will. Most creatively, they were claiming that the original 1,999 abandonment was actually a temporary custody arrangement that Roberto had refused to honor. The problem, Mr. Henderson said honestly, is that juries can be unpredictable when it comes to family disputes. Even with all of Roberto's documentation, they might see this as a tragic family that deserves reconciliation. Patterson's firm is excellent at making people believe that money corrupts families and that blood should stick together. But here's where Roberto's meticulous planning became clear. He hadn't just prepared for this lawsuit. He'd been building a case against it for 24 years. Your grandfather, Mr. Henderson said, with what I swear was admiration, was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Do you remember him giving you a safety deposit box key on your 21st birthday? I did remember. He'd made a big ceremony of it, saying it contained family treasures that would be mine someday. I'd assumed it was jewelry or old photographs. We need to visit that box today. Roberto left specific instructions that its contents should only be opened if your parents ever tried to claim the inheritance. The safety deposit box was at First National Bank, just 2 blocks from Roberto's flagship restaurant. As we walked there, Mr. Sate Henderson prepared me for what we might find, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality. The box contained a manila folder labeled Insurance Policy Against Greed in Roberto's handwriting. Inside were photocopies of 17 letters my parents had sent over the years, each one more desperate and manipulative than the last. The earliest, dated December 2001, started with "We miss Celeste terribly," but quickly devolved into questions about Roberto's investment success and whether he might reconsider the family arrangement. By 2010, the letters had dropped any pretense of caring about me. One read, "We know the restaurants are doing well. We've been watching from a distance. We still consider ourselves part of the family business and believe we deserve our fair share of what we helped you build by giving you Celeste." The audacity was breathtaking. They were claiming credit for abandoning me because it somehow helped Roberto build his empire. But the most damning evidence was a series of private investigator reports Roberto had commissioned, starting in 2005. He'd been having my parents followed periodically, documenting their lives and financial situations. The reports painted a picture of two people who had never learned to manage money responsibly. Multiple bankruptcies, several failed business ventures, and a pattern of borrowing from friends and family with no intention of repaying. "Look at this one." Mr. Henderson pointed to a report from 2018. "They took out a second mortgage on their house to invest in a cryptocurrency scheme, lost everything, and blamed the crypto market manipulation rather than their own poor judgment." There was more, much more. Roberto had been forwarding their letters to a forensic psychologist who specialized in family manipulation patterns. Dr. Sarah Kim had been analyzing their correspondence for over a decade, building a psychological profile that would destroy their loving parents forced apart by circumstances narrative. According to Dr. Kim's analysis, Mr. Henderson explained, "Your parents show classic signs of narcissistic entitlement and financial manipulation. They've never once in 17 letters asked about your well-being, your education, your health, or your happiness. Every single communication centers around money, business success, or their perceived right to family wealth." But the knockout punch was a video recording I never knew existed. Roberto had secretly recorded their last conversation in 1999, the night before they abandoned me. Arizona is a one-party consent state, so the recording was completely legal. In it, my parents could be heard arguing that taking me away from Roberto would be the best leverage we have and that he'll pay anything to get her back. My mother's voice, captured on decades-old audio equipment, said words that would haunt me forever. "The old man loves her more than money, so we use her to get the money. Simple as that. This recording alone, Mr. Henderson said, destroys their entire case. They're on tape discussing using you as leverage for financial gain. No jury in the world will side with them after hearing this." Sitting in that bank vault, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that had shaped my entire life, I felt something shift inside me. The abandoned little girl who'd spent 24 years wondering what she'd done wrong was finally completely dead. In her place sat a woman who understood exactly what had happened and why. You know what, I need to pause here for a second because I know some of you are probably feeling the same way I felt in that moment. Absolutely blown away by the level of planning and manipulation involved in this whole situation. Are you Team Celeste right now, or do you think there might be more to this story? Let me know in the comments what you're thinking so far, because honestly, I was not prepared for what came next. Make sure you're subscribed, because this legal battle is about to get absolutely wild, and the way Roberto planned his final revenge, pure genius. Mr. Henderson and I spent the rest of that day planning what he called the most satisfying legal counterattack of his 4-decade career. Roberto hadn't just left me evidence, he'd left me a complete battle plan typed out in his meticulous handwriting and updated as recently as 3 months before his death. "Your grandfather, Mr. Henderson said with genuine admiration, understood that the best defense is often a devastating offense. We're not just going to defend against their lawsuit. We're going to destroy their credibility so thoroughly that they'll wish they'd never come back. The first part of Roberto's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Let them lie under oath. Their lawsuit was full of false claims about being loving parents who were manipulated and threatened. Roberto had predicted they would paint themselves as victims, so he'd gathered evidence that would prove they were anything but. We're going to let them tell their sob story to the court, Mr. Henderson explained. We'll let them claim they were heartbroken to leave you, that they've missed you every day for 24 years, that they only want what's fair for family. And then we're going to systematically prove that every word is a lie. The private investigator reports revealed that my parents had been living quite comfortably in Nevada, running a small but successful consulting business. They weren't desperate or struggling. They were simply greedy. More importantly, they'd been monitoring Roberto's business success through social media and local news articles about his restaurant expansion. This wasn't a spontaneous emotional response to his death. It was a calculated move they'd been planning for years. But Roberto's masterstroke was something called a poisoned inheritance. Buried in the legal documents was a clause I'd missed during the initial reading. If my parents ever attempted to claim any portion of the estate through legal action, they would automatically become liable for all legal fees, court costs, and something called frivolous litigation damages. Essentially, Mr. Henderson grinned, your grandfather set a legal trap. By suing you, they've triggered a counterclaim that could leave them owing the estate hundreds of thousands of dollars. And since they signed their names to a lawsuit full of lies that we can prove are false, we can pursue perjury charges and fraud penalties. Dr. Sarah Kim, the forensic psychologist, had prepared a comprehensive report that would be devastating in court. 24 years of letters and communications showed a clear pattern. My parents viewed me as a financial instrument, not a daughter. They had never asked about my education, health, relationships, or general well-being. Every single contact with Roberto had been about money, business, valuation, or inheritance rights. Look at this timeline, Dr. Kim had written in her analysis. The frequency of their letters correlates directly with news articles about Roberto's business expansion. They wrote more often when the restaurants were featured in local media, less often during quiet periods. This suggests they were monitoring his success and timing their outreach for maximum financial impact. The psychological profile was damning. Both parents display classic narcissistic traits with strong antisocial tendencies. They demonstrate no genuine attachment to their child, viewing her instead as a commodity to be leveraged for financial gain. Their communications show manipulation, entitlement, and a complete lack of empathy or parental instinct. But Roberto had saved the best evidence for last. Hidden in a separate safety deposit box were recordings of phone calls my parents had made to Roberto's restaurant managers over the years. They'd been calling periodically, pretending to be family members, checking on the business, asking detailed questions about revenue, expansion plans, and property values. The managers who knew about the family situation had been instructed to record these calls and forward them to Roberto. In one particularly damning recording from 2019, my father could be heard saying, "We're not asking for charity here. We're investors in this family business. Our sacrifice gave Roberto the opportunity to build his empire, and we deserve our return on that investment." Their sacrifice, of course, was abandoning their 4-year-old daughter. Mr. Henderson's plan was to let them perjure themselves in depositions and court testimony, then systematically destroy their credibility with Roberto's evidence. They're going to claim they were loving parents forced into an impossible situation. We're going to prove they were calculating predators who sold their daughter for the chance at easy money. The forensic accountant Roberto had hired discovered something even more interesting. My parents had been using information gathered from their restaurant calls to make investment decisions. They'd invested in several restaurant supply companies after learning about Roberto's expansion plans, essentially using insider information gained through their manipulation to profit in the stock market. That Mr. Henderson said with satisfaction is securities fraud. We can turn this civil lawsuit into a federal criminal case if we want to. But the most emotionally devastating evidence was a series of social media posts my parents had made over the years. While they were writing letters to Roberto claiming they missed me terribly, they were posting on Facebook about their child-free lifestyle and how much they enjoyed not being tied down by family obligations. They'd even posted vacation photos with captions like, "This is why we chose freedom over responsibility." Roberto had been screenshotting these posts for years, building a catalog of evidence that proved they felt no genuine loss or regret about abandoning me. They were celebrating their decision publicly, while privately scheming to benefit from it financially. The jury is going to see parents who abandoned their 4-year-old daughter never looked back, celebrated their freedom for decades, and then sued that same daughter for millions when the grandfather who raised her died. Mr. Henderson summarized. It's going to be a massacre. I felt something I hadn't experienced since Roberto's death. Hope. Not just hope that I'd win the lawsuit, but hope that justice would finally be served for a 4-year-old girl who had spent 24 years believing she wasn't worthy of love. When do we start fighting back? I asked. Mr. Henderson smiled. Tomorrow. We file our countersuit, and then we let your parents dig their own graves with their lies. The courtroom was packed on the morning of October 15th, 3 months after Roberto's death. Word had gotten out about the case. A story of parents suing their abandoned daughter for inheritance money was juicy enough to attract local media attention. I sat at the defendant's table in my best black suit, the same one I'd worn to Roberto's funeral, feeling like I was about to vindicate not just myself, but his entire legacy. My parents walked in like they owned the place. Marcus Rivera, now 52, had the swagger of someone who thought he was about to become a millionaire. Linda, 49, wore an expensive-looking dress that seemed calculated to project success and respectability. They'd clearly invested in their courtroom appearance, probably banking on that $2.7 million payday. They hadn't seen me in 24 years, but neither of them even glanced in my direction as they took their seats. That small detail told me everything I needed to know about their priorities. Their lawyer, Patricia Patterson from Patterson Wells and Associates, was exactly what I'd expected, polished, aggressive, and absolutely convinced of her client's victimhood. Her opening statement painted my parents as heartbroken young people who'd been financially coerced by a manipulative older man into making an impossible choice. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, this is a story about a grandfather who used money as a weapon to tear a family apart. Marcus and Linda Rivera were young parents facing financial hardship when Roberto Rivera made them an unconscionable offer: give up your daughter or lose any hope of financial stability for your family's future. She spun a tale of Roberto as a controlling patriarch who demanded total custody in exchange for any family financial support. According to her narrative, my parents had been forced to make the ultimate sacrifice to ensure I had a stable home with better educational and financial opportunities. They gave up their daughter, Patterson continued, not out of selfishness but out of love. And now, 24 years later, they're being punished for that sacrifice by being completely cut out of the family legacy they helped create through their ultimate gift. It was a compelling story, I had to admit. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been moved by it. Then it was Mr. Henderson's turn. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said quietly, "over the next few days you're going to hear a very different story. You're going to hear recordings of the defendants discussing how to use their 4-year-old daughter as leverage to extract money from her grandfather. You're going to see letters where they celebrate their child-free lifestyle while simultaneously demanding payment for the sacrifice of abandoning their daughter." He paused, letting that sink in. "You're going to learn that Marcus and Linda Rivera didn't sacrifice their daughter out of love. They sold her for the chance at easy money, and when that didn't work out the way they planned, they spent 24 years scheming for another shot at the same payday." The first witness was devastating. Dr. Sarah Kim, the forensic psychologist, walked the jury through 24 years of correspondence. She explained how genuine parental grief and love would manifest in communication patterns, then showed how my parents' letters demonstrated the exact opposite. "In genuine cases of forced family separation, Dr. Kim testified, parents focus on the child's well-being, ask about their development, express emotional pain about the separation itself. In these letters we see none of that. Instead, we see consistent focus on business, performance, asset valuation, and financial entitlement." Patterson tried to cross-examine, suggesting that my parents' focus on money was actually concern for my future financial security. Dr. Kim shut that down immediately. "If these communications showed genuine concern for the child's financial future, we would expect to see questions about college funds, educational expenses, or long-term financial planning for the child's benefit. Instead, we see demands for immediate payment to the parents with no mention of setting aside money for the child's future needs." The second day brought the restaurant managers who'd received those phone calls over the years. One by one, they testified about my parents' attempts to gather financial intelligence about Roberto's business. The recordings were played in court, and I watched the jury's faces change as they heard my father describing their abandonment of me as an investment that deserved returns. "But the nuclear bomb was the 1,999 recording of my parents planning to use me as leverage." The courtroom was completely silent as my mother's voice filled the room. "The old man loves her more than money, so we use her to get the money. Simple as that." I watched my parents' faces as their own words played back to them. Marcus stared at the table, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Linda actually looked annoyed, like she was frustrated that Roberto had recorded their private conversation. When Patterson cross-examined the audio expert about the recording's authenticity, you could feel the desperation in her questions. The expert confirmed that the recording was genuine, unedited, and legally obtained under Arizona's one-party consent laws. The third day brought my parents' social media history. 24 years of posts, celebrating their freedom, bragging about their child-free lifestyle, and making jokes about dodging the responsibility bullet. The jury saw vacation photos captioned, "This is the life," and posts about how much money they saved by not having kids to support. The prosecution's cross-examination of my parents was brutal. Mr. Henderson walked them through every lie in their lawsuit, every contradiction between their sworn testimony and their documented behavior over 2 decades. Mr. Rivera Henderson said calmly, "You testified that you missed your daughter every day for 24 years. Can you explain this Facebook post from 2015 where you wrote, and I quote, 'Best decision we ever made was choosing freedom over family obligations'?" Marcus fumbled for an explanation, claiming the post was taken out of context. But there were dozens of similar posts, creating a pattern that was impossible to explain away. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Not only did they rule in my favor, but they awarded me additional damages for emotional distress and legal fees. The total judgment was $847,000, money my parents would now owe me on top of getting nothing from Roberto's estate. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was finally having an official record that I hadn't been abandoned because I wasn't enough. I'd been sold by parents who valued money more than their own child. The judge's final words still ring in my ears. This court has rarely seen such a clear case of parental abandonment motivated by financial greed. The defendant's own words and actions over 24 years demonstrate a complete lack of parental love or responsibility. Not only is their lawsuit dismissed, but they are liable for damages and legal fees totaling $847,000. As the gavel came down, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete closure. The abandoned 4-year-old inside me finally had her answer. It wasn't that I wasn't lovable enough. It was that my parents weren't capable of love at all. My parents' lawyer immediately filed for bankruptcy on their behalf, which was somehow the most fitting end to this story I could imagine. They'd spent 24 years dreaming about the money they'd earned by abandoning me, and now they were financially ruined by their own greed. The cosmic justice was almost too perfect to believe. But the real satisfaction came from what happened next. Within a week of the judgment, local media picked up the story. Parents sue daughter for inheritance. After 24-year abandonment became a viral sensation shared millions of times across social media platforms. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive of me and absolutely brutal toward my parents. Their small consulting business in Nevada folded within a month as clients canceled contracts after learning about the case. Their social media accounts, which had been public and full of their child-free lifestyle celebrations, became targets for thousands of comments from people who were disgusted by their behavior. They were forced to delete everything and essentially disappear from public view. Some people might say that level of public shaming was excessive, but I remember Roberto's words: "Actions have consequences, Mija." Sometimes those consequences take years to arrive, but they always come. My parents had spent 24 years celebrating their decision to abandon me. Now they were experiencing the natural consequences of that choice. The inheritance allowed me to do something Roberto would have loved. I expanded his restaurant empire exactly as we'd planned. Within 6 months of the court victory, I opened 2 new locations and created a scholarship fund for children who'd aged out of the foster care system. Every year, the Roberto Rivera Foundation helps 50 kids who've experienced family abandonment get college educations. But perhaps the most healing part of this entire experience was discovering how many people had similar stories. The case brought me into contact with hundreds of people who'd been abandoned, rejected, or financially manipulated by family members. I started a support group that meets monthly at the original restaurant location, and it's become a community of chosen family that Roberto would have absolutely loved. Dr. Kim, the forensic psychologist who helped win my case, became not just a professional contact, but a genuine friend. She helped me process the trauma of learning the truth about my abandonment, and she continues to provide therapy services through the foundation for other people dealing with family manipulation and abandonment. The most unexpected development came 8 months after the court case. I received a letter from my parents' former lawyer, Patricia Patterson. She'd apparently been so disgusted by what she learned about my parents during the case that she'd referred several similar inheritance fraud cases to Mr. Henderson. She wrote, "In 30 years of practice, I've never represented clients whose behavior was so thoroughly reprehensible. Thank you for teaching me to better screen potential clients for basic human decency." Even their own lawyer had been sickened by their actions once she learned the full truth. Today, 3 years later, I'm running a successful restaurant empire that employs over 200 people across Arizona. I'm married to an incredible man who understands that family is about choice, not biology. We're planning to start our own family soon, and I know that Roberto's legacy of unconditional love will continue through the children we raise. My parents occasionally attempt to contact me through social media or mutual acquaintances, usually around the anniversaries of Roberto's death or major holidays. These attempts are always blocked and documented, just in case they ever try to claim we've reconciled for some future legal purpose. I learned from Roberto's example, keep records of everything, because people who value money over family will always prioritize money over family. The restaurant walls are covered with photos of Roberto and me throughout the years. Cooking together, celebrating holidays, graduation, pictures, business milestones. Customers often comment on how obvious our love and connection were, how clear it is that he was my real father in every way that mattered. That legacy of love is worth more than any amount of money my biological parents could have tried to claim. Roberto's final gift wasn't just the inheritance money or even the evidence he'd gathered to protect it. His final gift was teaching me that I was worthy of fierce, protective, unconditional love. The kind of love that plans for dangers you can't even see yet, that protects you even after death, that creates justice when the world seems unfair. So here's my question for you. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that made you question everything you thought you knew about love and loyalty? Have you seen karma catch up with people who chose greed over family? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and sometimes the shared experiences help more than you know. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama and justice-served moments. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that chosen family is just as valid as biological family, and that sometimes the universe really does deliver perfect justice to people who deserve it. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember, the people who show up when you have nothing to offer in return, those are your real family. Blood may be thicker than water, but love and loyalty are thicker than blood.